What happens when we die? What do near-death experiences teach us about the afterlife? And what has scientific research found? To answer these questions, Dr. Jeff Long collected over 5,000 NDE testimonies from all over the world. And this is what he found.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
We're here with Dr. Jeff Long. He's a physician, an NDE researcher. In 1998, he founded the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. Since then, he's collected over 5,000 NDE testimonies from all over the world. I'd like to start out by asking you a simple question. What happens when we die?
It seems when we die, based on thousands of near-death experiences and actually other experiences as well, it seems that our consciousness will separate from our physical body. We're still who we are, all the memories. We are ourselves. We just are no longer physical. We have a disembodied, separate, non-physical consciousness that will separate from that permanently, irreversibly dead body. And we then travel into an unearthly realm. It's been called heavenly realm, which is a very apt description given how glorious it is. We'll be free of pain, the miseries, the stuff that we all know in our earthly life that's been an impediment. And we'll be back to being our eternal, everlasting, spiritual, if you will, real selves in an afterlife without end. So that's succinctly expressed what I firmly believe, based on a mountain of evidence, is our destiny. A quite detailed experience would be like this. Boom, there's that life-threatening event. They're unconscious or even clinically dead with no heartbeat. At that time, when they shouldn't have any consciousness at all, they do. Consciousness rises above their physical body. From that vantage point, they can see and hear ongoing earthly events, which may include the frantic efforts of people trying to bring them back to life. They then may travel into or through a tunnel. Often at the end of that tunnel, there's described a beautiful, mystical, unearthly light. And as they pass through that light, they're in that unearthly, that heavenly realm. This is a very non-physical environment. This is the afterlife. Time is either radically different from here or simply doesn't exist. The movement is non-physical. You're literally not physical. You're hyper alert in this environment. You're able to process information and cognitively functioning at a far greater level. There may be a life review where they see part or even all of their prior earthly life. They may meet deceased loved ones. These are joyous reunions. It can be a lot of communication. Even deceased pets are encountered at this point. In this realm, they're feeling overwhelming peace and love. Those are two of the most common descriptive words used when people share their near-death experience. They typically describe a feeling of love that is beyond anything they could possibly know on earth. At this point in time, they may, again, they're in a landscape. There can be buildings, there can be flowers, there can be colors. They often will say colors are beautiful beyond anything they knew on earth. They have colors that are so beautiful they have no descriptors on earth. Same thing with music. It may be beautiful beyond anything even possible on earth. So it's truly a remarkably heavenly realm. They feel like us, as so many say, that that's their real home, that that's where they belong. And even though up until that time, years or decades of their earthly life, that's all they knew, this area, this arena they're in, this unearthly, beautiful heavenly realm is so compelling to them. The great majority don't want to go back to their earthly life and everything that was familiar. Life reviews occur in about 20% of near-death experiences. They may see part or all of their prior life. A common theme is to say they were like screens or multiple screens, and they'd have either their life flowing through sequentially or portions of their life on different screens. Interestingly, even if they review their entire life, there's essentially never a sense of judgment, external judgment. Certainly near-death experiencers can and do have their own opinion about their prior life, but they don't really feel a sense of external judgment, which I think is very important here too. By the way, that also shows how radically accelerated consciousness, cognitive thinking is. I mean, here you are unconscious or dead for minutes, and you're reviewing your entire life of decades. They really are aware of even how their smallest life actions, for good or for ill, can radically affect other people around them. And over during a life review, they see that a little act of kindness, a little act of love had sort of like a ripple effect and made far more of a positive impact than they could have ever guessed it. So that's really interesting. From near-death experience research, it's a basic scientific principle that what is real is consistently observed. And that's exciting in the research I've done on near-death experiences to directly answer your question.
There are some cases which are known as verified near-death experiences, in which the person leaves the body, sees something happening in the real world, and when they come back, they talk about it and it ended up being real. Do you remember any of these cases?
Just one real quick example of that out of literally hundreds. There was a person riding a horse about a mile away from the stable, and the horse bucked and she fell off and bam, hit her head and had very severe damage to her brain, instantly unconscious, probably comatose. Near-death experience, consciousness over the body. Her consciousness then traveled about a mile away to the stable where there were other people there, and from that vantage point, she saw and heard in detail exactly what they were saying while she was unconscious and fighting for her life over a mile away. So when she came back and checked that out, what was going on right at that time, bam, accurate down to the absolute finest details. That's called veridical perception, veridical or verified perception, and that's as exactly like you said, especially early on in near-death experiences, that out-of-body experience, consciousness over their body, seeing and hearing earthly events while their physical body down there is unconscious or dead. Now, that's an anecdote. By the time you have hundreds, literally, of these types of veridical perception accounts, there's no question about that. That's a part of reality. And in fact, when I study near-death experiences, I'm far more fascinated at this point with the very rare near-death experiences where what they saw in that out-of-body experience isn't accurate. And those are rare. I mean, those are less than 1% or 2. For virtually all the observations, when they go back and check out their observations later, what they saw, even if it was geographically far from the physical body and way outside of any possible physical sensory awareness, it's validated. That really happened, and it's absolutely medically inexplicable that their brain could have been aware of those earthly events while they were unconscious or dead. So again, that's probably one of the, if not the strongest line of evidence for the reality of near-death experiences. And may I add, the same phenomena of veridical perception can occur when the heart stops while you're under general anesthesia. It should be doubly impossible in those circumstances to have a conscious remembrance, and yet, just like all other near-death experiences under other circumstances, what they see, what they hear at that time, almost invariably found to be pinpoint and highly detailed, accurate later. The very first near-death experience I heard in person was a lady who had a severe allergy while she was under general anesthesia, and she coded, her heart stopped. Had an out-of-body experience, and from that vantage point, she described accurately what happens when your heart stops when you're under anesthesia. The heart obviously is very carefully monitored under general anesthesia. That's the job of the anesthesiologist doctor. So what she described, the EKG machine makes a huge alarm, a very loud racket when your heart stops. So she very accurately described what would go on in the operating room when your heart stops. She also described the panic. Crash carts don't magically appear. There's all sorts of scrambling, panic, tears, anxiety, and she literally observed all of that for an unexpected cardiac arrest while under general anesthesia. She went on to have a very detailed near-death experience. That is also that veridical perception, especially when she came back and validated, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I'm a doctor, I can tell darn good and well that's what happens in the operating room when something adverse like that occurs. No doubt about it. But again, while that's anecdotal, please understand we have scores and scores of these types of experiences. We literally on our website have received hundreds and hundreds of accounts like that. These are not rare by any means. And in fact, I've studied that. And in a prior study I did of over 200 of such accounts, I found that what they saw or heard did not seem to be unrealistic, either by the near-death experiencer's description or by my assessment of what they wrote in any way. But again, we have literally at this point in time hundreds of these types of observations where people went back and checked it out. No doubt about it, veridical perception, especially under general anesthesia, profoundly powerful evidence that near-death experiences cannot possibly be due to physical brain function at all. And there really is an immaterial part of all of us, call it a soul, if you will, that separates at a near-death experience.
I wanted to ask you about your second book,
Mhm.
God and the Afterlife, the groundbreaking new evidence for God and near-death experience.
Mhm.
So, what were your main conclusions?
It's fairly common for near-death experiencers to describe an awareness or encounter with God in their near-death experience. So obviously, I was fascinated. So that book involves studying over 270 of these types of encounters with God. So that's a huge study. So we were able to come up with some conclusions about what that's all about. God is and again, we're back to that scientific principle, what's real, consistently observed. And we've got the same thing going on here in the study of God. And it's remarkable. God, descriptive wise, is variably described. That's not surprising because God is non-physical. He's not a fixed physicality like we have in our earthly life with events and things in earthly life. But the most common descriptive word about God's appearance is light. It may be formed in some form of a being or may appear amorphous. But what is strikingly consistent is the overwhelming sense of love. They feel that God loves them for who they are, everything they are, and through and through. Remarkably, and to the surprise of many people having a near-death experience, there's never a sense of judgment from God, regardless of what their earthly life. And certainly, we've all made some mistakes in our earthly life. And yet, with God, there's that overwhelming sense of peace and awareness that you're not being judged. They sense that God is indeed if you will, a supreme being, overwhelmingly knowledgeable, overwhelming, creative force is another thing. And then remarkably, people will often say they feel a connection with God and even a unity. And they actually use that stronger word unity more commonly than the weaker word connection. And if you look up the dictionary definition of love, it's like a connection that they feel that literal unity with God, which is of course quite unexpected and to many near-death experiencers. And actually, since that's not at all common thinking, unity with God in typical Western religions, which is where most of these NDEs are from, the fact that it's so overwhelmingly consistently described and not culturally determined is yet another strong evidence for the reality of near-death experiences. God may be there during the life review, God may be there at the time of decision about returning back to earthly life, or God may simply say, your time is not up, or language to that effect, and then boom, they go back to their earthly life. But there's some fascinating dialogues with God in that book, exploring some very deep spiritual questions that are, again, very striking and very consistent with this really being God. Oh, I might add, God is a loaded word. God means, as a word, means many different things to many different people. So I want to emphasize right off the bat that many near-death experiencers point to that and say, God is a word that is used on earth that is absolutely inadequate to describe this overwhelming being of love, compassion, knowledge, non-judgment, supremacy. This words fail literally. In fact, one near-death experiencer said to even try to put a word to describe God is to be limiting, and God is literally unlimited. So watch out for loaded language. This being is God is the most common word, and it's the closest thing, best word we have here, but that God in near-death experience is far beyond descriptive language.
A lot of them mention a city of heaven, and they also talk about a meadow. What are your thoughts regarding this meadow and the city of heaven?
I would emphasize there's not one discrete localized city in heaven. You're really interacting with an eternal, infinite realm. So I think that again, that overwhelming divine presence on the other side is going to create an environment that would be best for the near-death experiencer. I mean, shoot, in this day and age, you wouldn't want to have a near-death experience and be existing in a cave like our predecessors that were cavemen. So, again, not surprising that this is part of the created environment that would be best, most loving and compassionate for them. But there's no question about that. These are beautiful buildings, but beautiful beyond anything on earth. Perfect. They may be described as beautiful colors, gold. Again, just beautiful beyond anything on earth. Same thing with the meadows, as we briefly mentioned earlier. There is landscapes analogous to what we have on earth, but again, over and over, they're described as being beautiful beyond anything on earth. I mean, the flowers may even have some consciousness. I mean, there may be things that are radically unearthly going on at the time that they're in these beautiful realms. Don't forget, while we're using earthly physical descriptive words, this is a very non-earthly realm. It is not physical. Communication is not physical. It's more telepathic. Basically, every near-death experiencer says in that realm, time is either radically different or does not exist. Movement is non-physical. So it's just a very beautiful, compelling, actually, description of heaven and the beauty that's there and all the trimmings. So again, I love reading those accounts, by the way, because they're just so fascinating and so beautiful. And you kind of sit here and think, wow, that heaven sure sounds like a nice place when we all get there.
One of the commonalities you mentioned in your first book is encountering a boundary or barrier. And this is something that people have told me, near-death experiencers, when I interviewed them, is that if you cross that boundary, you will not
Yeah.
be able to come back. What are
Mhm.
your thoughts regarding this boundary and what lies beyond?
That is a great question. That shows you're really seeing, right at the leading edge of near-death experiences. While it's uncommon, that's again a very consistent theme. I see this over and over. If I'm reading an NDE account that's been shared with us, and if they're walking along, often with other spiritual beings, if there's a bridge in the pathway coming up, if there's a creek going across the road, I know darn good and well they're coming up on a boundary. I know what's going to happen next. Exactly what you just said there. At that point in time, they won't cross almost ever. They'll dialogue with the other beings. That will either be time for them to be involuntarily returned to the physical body or they have a choice. And what's interesting too, just like you've observed, it's not at all uncommon that when there is that boundary, a chasm, a valley, or something on the other side, even though they're in an overwhelmingly beauty, off the scale environment where they're at, what they see across that valley, across in the distance, is even far more beautiful yet. So I think it's a very vivid way that they're trying to share this as beautiful and incredible as these heavenly realms that you're in. What lies beyond that even greater reality with permanent irreversible death is even grander yet and probably beyond our even sensory processing in our earthly everyday. So yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. And I think that's a very clear indication that as amazing as these heavenly realms are, the ultimate real reality, that if you will, the heaven beyond, is probably even more grander than we might even be able to imagine. So that's exciting and certainly very inspiring and very reassuring.
In your first book, you also talk about hellish encounters. How do
Mhm.
you explain them?
Sure. That's one thing that is still a bit of a mystery to me. I could talk about that for quite a while, but my thinking about that so far is that only about 1 or 2% of near-death experiences have hellish realms. And there's two ways they can encounter that. About half the people that are, they're describing a hellish realm. In other words, they may be moving through space, through heaven, and see a segregated, separated area apart, and they can sense or be told that's the area of hell. So when people say there cannot possibly be hell and heaven, they're correct because this is a very distinct, separate part from that. But as best I can tell, one thing that's a consistent theme in near-death experiences is free will. People get their chance to choose their own ways. They're not forced into any decisions or realms. So my best working hypothesis at this point is that there exists a hellish realm in heaven because there is a presumptively a number of very malevolent souls, beings in the heavenly realm that are unable to let go of their malevolence, their evil in that realm, and to them, heaven would actually be in a place where there's other beings like them that share that values, where they can be evil and malevolent in the presence of other evil and malevolent people. And paradoxically and sadly, that seems to be their heaven. So that's my best guess as to how hellish realms can exist. And actually, the fact that there are hellish realms observed in heaven is some of the strongest indication that free will, even the ability to make very extremely poor choices of free will, seems to be operant even when we're souls in heaven for those that choose to go to that realm.
Do you think that culture and religion affect the way NDEs are perceived and interpreted?
Certainly, I think certainly if you have a Christian background, you're more likely to encounter Jesus because that would be more meaningful. That would be more part of what would be helpful to continue to live your earthly life, which is, I think, a major purpose of near-death experiences and why people have them in a lot of the specific content. I mean, don't forget when you encounter deceased loved ones, they're your deceased loved ones. They're not a deceased person from Iran or from Saudi Arabia or something. So we do see that kind of cultural awareness, but again, that's not the sense that the culture determines that. It's just simply, if you will, a loving co-creation of what happens, who you meet in a near-death experience. That would make a lot of sense if there's some guidance in what happens and who you meet from an overwhelming loving God. So I think that's what's going on here. However, yeah, absolutely, there's going to be some interpretation of this. In other words, if someone has been a very devout Christian all their life, they absolutely will have a near-death experience and put it into the box of their particular belief in Christian religion. Same thing with Muslims. If they have they're devout Muslims and they have an experience, there's a lot of overlap between what happens in near-death experiences and a wide variety of religious beliefs. I mean, they come back further confident that there's an afterlife, further confident that there is a God, as various words could be used. They do come back understanding the importance of love, a huge common theme in near-death experiences. They come back understanding that we have that immaterial part we talked about that separates from the body in near-death experience. That is, I think, very really conceptualized as a soul. So there it is, validating a lot of their religious beliefs. So I think the foundation of religious beliefs throughout the world, or most religious beliefs, that being of a God, an afterlife, the importance of love, the importance of compassion. There's lots of information in, especially detailed near-death experiences, supporting the pre-existing religious beliefs and concepts like that for anyone, including the near-death experiencers that have their NDEs.
I've interviewed over 100 near-death experiencers, not as many as you. However, I interviewed two Jews who saw Jesus in their NDEs, and I also interviewed several atheists who had an encounter with God. How would you explain this based on what you just said?
That's a classic example that near-death experiences are not the content. What occurs is not explainable by their prior religious or cultural beliefs or beliefs of what would happen during a near-death experience. So, yeah, that absolutely happens. People may encounter religious beings, and that's unusual, but it sure does happen. And, again, it's just I can't help but think this is part of a co-creation with the other side, with God, with an overwhelming compassionate force, giving them information that those particular individuals needed to live their earthly life. I have a small series of people that were atheists and encountered God, just like you talked to. Or even Jesus, one of my favorite atheist accounts is there was a dyed-in-the-wool atheist who had a near-death experience and met Jesus in a business suit. And they talked and dialogued a little bit. And finally, the atheist said in the NDE, well, Jesus, why are you wearing a business suit? What's that all about? And Jesus said laughingly, if I appeared in robes, you wouldn't believe it, would you? And so they laughed and laughed and thought that was very funny. So again, it's really, there's a lot of distinct individual people, and then there's that constant, consistent theme you see in the afterlife of love and those kind of entities that will interact with people having a near-death experience, probably with some very distinct meaning and purpose, whatever that interaction might be or whatever they're shown.
In 2021, you published an article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. It was called The Phenomenology of Iranian Near-Death Experiences. What were your main conclusions?
That was a study that I did with an Iranian near-death experience researcher, and he found 20 people in Iran, Muslims, non-Western culture, of course, that had near-death experiences. And as we concluded, the content of these near-death experiences is strikingly similar to typical Western near-death experiences. We knew that. I've known that from literally carefully studying many scores of non-Western near-death experiences, but certainly interpretation is going to be difficult. How you share it with other people is going to be difficult. For example, I was curious and talked with my co-investigator. Actually, he was the first author. His name, I'll call him Ali. And I asked him, I said, gee, Ali, here we are with a lot of these Muslim near-death experiences, and yet I haven't seen anyone describe that they encountered Muhammad. What's up with that? And Ali said, in the Islam culture, it would be very frowned upon to say that you encountered Muhammad. So we're back to that cultural interpretation. Even if people during their near-death experience in Iran did encounter the real spiritual entity of Muhammad, I can certainly understand, especially in a repressive regime like that, their reluctance to share that they encountered Muhammad. So that is yet another issue in trying to study near-death experiences and their religious and figures that they may encounter.
Regarding children's NDEs, these seem to show the same common elements, despite the fact that they have not been alive for long. What are your conclusions regarding children's NDEs?
Sure. I did a study of young children, age 5 and younger. Average and median age was 3.5 years old. Kids that young are practically culturally a blank slate. They almost certainly don't have well-formed beliefs about death. They almost certainly have no idea thinking about processing what would happen if they die. And they almost certainly have never heard about near-death experiences and wouldn't understand it anyway. So imagine my surprise when I compared that group of very young children to near-death experiences in the group of older children and adults. And in the 33 characteristics or elements, what occurs during near-death experience, remarkably, there was no statistical difference between the two groups, which is absolutely astounding and yet further powerful evidence that near-death experiences are not culturally determined or lack of culturally determined. There simply seems to be a consistent commonality regardless of age. And so that's, and again, very exciting to see that. Now, there are some subtleties among kids that have near-death experiences. There may be another spiritual being with them. That may be more common. They will, and interestingly, a number of these very young children are very clear when they share their near-death experience that cognitively how they were thinking, how they seemed to be processing information during their near-death experience was a lot more like being an adult, far greater than what they would expect as a child. So again, just yet another powerful line of evidence that near-death experiences are not culturally determined, and that does seem to be a consistent theme that seems to be a very real interaction with the afterlife when they occur.
When people have an NDE, whether it's a positive NDE or a hellish, their worldview shatters.
Yeah.
They come back and they must face a new reality.
Yeah.
This really transforms them. Have you thought about that, and what can you tell us about this?
Yes, I've thought about that. Those are called near-death experience after effects. The very consistently changes in beliefs and values that people have, as you've seen, after a near-death experience. I actually published last year the largest scholarly study on near-death experience after effects that's ever been done. And as part of that, we had 834 people that had near-death experiences, and we compared that to a group of 42 people that completed the survey on our website, but they didn't have an NDE. They had a life-threatening event. So we could see head-to-head between the two groups to see, okay, these people changed dramatically. Was it because they had a life-threatening event, or was it because they had a near-death experience? And my study conclusively found mammoth differences between the life views and changes of people that had a life-threatening event only. They didn't have anywhere near the changes as the group that had near-death experiences. And in fact, part of the survey we asked them to respond to a number of questions: their belief in an afterlife, in God, their level of compassion at the time they had the near-death experience, and compare it to when they shared their experience with us, which is an average of about 15 years later. And it's just orders of magnitude increased belief in people that have a near-death experience in the reality of God, the reality of an afterlife. Interestingly, their self-described level of compassion is literally orders of magnitude greater than it was at the time they had their near-death experience. This is just off the scale striking. Beyond that, not surprisingly, they have essentially no fear of death, and just a variety of other very profound changes. So it changes them very much in terms of their values, beliefs, interpersonal relationships. They may have to change jobs if they can't express their newfound values. And so it's the life changes are not only profound and certainly due to the near-death experience, but they also tend to increase over time, over their life, which again bespeaks the people having near-death experiences understanding how real it is, how important it is that they make those life changes and continue to develop those life changes years, decades later.
Would you say that this shattering of the worldview is traumatic?
It can be. Certainly, when a number of people that have a near-death experience, I mean, put yourself in their feet, in their shoes. Here they are in a beautiful, unearthly, heavenly realm, bliss, feeling love, and connection off the scale, anything they ever knew possible. And yet, boom, all of a sudden they're thrown back into their earthly physical body and all the dang miseries that come with trying to get over a close brush with death and then trying to, integrate that highly non-earthly experience and especially try to communicate it with other people. So not surprisingly, shortly after near-death experience, many people go through a profound depression, a yearning. They want to go back. They know darn good and well suicide's not the answer, which is another great truth of what people know from near-death experiences. But they do have that sense of missing and may feel very bad about that. And that can take often months, if not longer, for them to get over that depression and then start to share it with other people. So there is that problem. However, having said that, people in general, they're making, I mean, good gosh, they're far more compassionate, less materialistic, increased confidence in an afterlife. So this really empowers people by the time they get over those early emotional reactions to their near-death experience, moving forward with the rest of their life, having not a faith in an afterlife, but a downright belief, a knowing from personal experience with every fiber of their being. And so they do, I think, become much more positive, often outgoing people. They may be more willing to take chances to study spiritual things, and certainly a lot of that, share them. Certainly, you've had a lot of people on your show that feel that it's important to share their experience. So these are people that are very, very changed and I think very, very positively changed overall over time.
Among these changes or among these after effects, some mention paranormal abilities.
Mhm.
What are the most common of these paranormal after effects?
Sure. That's another survey question we ask very directly. Did you, or after your experience, did you have any paranormal, I have to think about the exact wording, but paranormal gifts that you did not have prior to your experience? So we asked that, and about 30%, 35%, as I recall, approximately, it's less than half anyway, say yes. And I've analyzed hundreds and hundreds of narrative responses of those that said yes, because we have a huge study on that, which would be fascinating for me to publish. So in reviewing that, it seems to me that the most common thing is sort of that intuitive sense. In other words, as best I can tell, they're more compassionate, they're more focused on people. I think they're picking up on those verbal and nonverbal clues, paying attention, uh, integrating with them emotionally in a way that they couldn't. And so for a lot of people, that comes off as being intuitive, knowing things that other people couldn't know, that other people didn't see them there or were aware of. So I think that seems to be the most common, is that type of intuition, I think based on interpersonal intuition. But there are certainly a small percentage of people that believe that they have a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. I've heard about everything. I mean, you're talking about increased psi ability, mediumship has been described, increased ability to basically have just a wide variety, pretty much every described paranormal, non-ordinary experience, one near-death experience or another at some time or another has described as having had that. So I wish there was a lot more scholarly study on these people that especially have had these very dramatic paranormal gifts, but there really is a surprising paucity of good scholarly literature on that. Maybe if I run out of things to do, I'll write up the results from that huge survey where we ask directly. I'll learn and then we can share it with the world.
Another thing that they mention as part of the after effects is that when they are close to electrical equipment or lights, they produce some sort of interference. Have you noticed that and
Mhm.
studied it?
Interestingly, when I started this over 25 years ago, in the early years, I heard lots and lots about people having near-death experiences saying, I can't wear watches, they don't work. That and being an electric, these were electric watches, or not necessarily, not always. And we saw lots and lots of that. And I'll tell you, in recent years, I've seen hardly any of that. I don't have a good explanation for that, but it's a very obvious phenomena. We do have some people with near-death experiences that do say they have trouble with computers, electrical things like computers, usually adverse effects. They're not getting their computer to run faster, unfortunately. But they certainly adverse electrical activity has been described. There was actually another article came out on that by one of the leaders in near-death experience research on electrical sensitivity. And again, it was like the findings are suggestive, but we just really need more research. So, I agree. There's so much in near-death experience where that's true. But certainly for those that have electrical sensitivity, they are convinced that they are definitely and very consistently typically adversely affecting electrical equipment of a wide assortment.
After interviewing so many people on my podcast, I have noticed that many of them have spent years, even decades, before they started sharing publicly. What can
Yeah.
you say about this?
Things are changing, thank goodness. When I started this back in over 25 years ago, I was, as a doctor, was so concerned about being associated with researching near-death experiences. On my huge research website, I was only Dr. Jeff to remain anonymous, because that was the often stigma among healthcare professionals and the public at that point in time. Now, certainly, the people you've talked to, they probably had their near-death experience a long time ago, or if you share it and you get poo-pooed by your friends, family, loved ones, or religious environment, that can be a real detriment to trying to integrate your experience and certainly reduce their confidence in trying to share an unearthly experience if they're encountering negativity when they share it. But there's a whole lot less negativity from people today because near-death experiences are so widely known and accepted. Certainly here in the United States, and I think worldwide, we're a lot more open to near-death experiences. They've been talked about so much. There's so much presentation and discussion about near-death experiences in the media, and certainly with the program you're doing is helping too. I think people are a lot more aware of it. They're a lot more accepting of it. And I think that's helping people to share their experiences, whereas I will guarantee you 30 or 40 years ago, when near-death experiences were less well known, people would be more reluctant. So I think people are a lot more willing to share, and certainly resuscitation measures that we have medically are bringing more people back from the brink of death. We're saving more people than ever possible before, for example, at the time of a cardiac arrest. So thanks to advances in medicine, we have more people that come back from that close brush with death and can share. It's really interesting. So how does this all impact the spiritual world? And it's really hard to say, but I think we're certainly hearing a lot more near-death experiences than we did 20, 25 years ago when I started this. People are sharing them sooner after they occurred, again, because of their confidence and their understanding. And people are far less skeptical of near-death experiences. People really understand deep down from evidence that near-death experiences are real. It's okay to share your near-death experience. It's okay to listen to other people's near-death experiences. And I think that's really helping people to be more open and positive about sharing them. It's helping other people that hear their near-death experiences to share in those positive life changes as they hear about, with some strong evidence from their friend, family, or loved one about the reality of an afterlife, of God, and how death is not to be feared. And that really sort of sinks in as a powerful spiritual message. Things are substantially different now. For instance, in 2021, a Pew Forum survey, which is a highly credible survey source here in America, found that 72% of Americans surveyed, when they were asked, do you believe that near-death experiences are an observation of the spirit leaving the physical body? 72% said yes. And that's a pretty good definition of near-death experiences. So nearly 3/4 of people, at least in America, are accepting the reality of near-death experiences at that level. We're seeing more near-death experiences, certainly here in the United States, and I think worldwide, we're a lot more open to near-death experiences. They've been talked about so much. There's so much presentation and discussion about near-death experiences in the media, and certainly with the program you're doing is helping too. I think people are a lot more aware of it. They're a lot more accepting of it. And I think that's helping people to share their experiences, whereas I will guarantee you 30 or 40 years ago, when near-death experiences were less well known, people would be more reluctant. So I think people are a lot more willing to share, and certainly resuscitation measures that we have medically are bringing more people back from the brink of death. We're saving more people than ever possible before, for example, at the time of a cardiac arrest. So we're thanks to advances in medicine, we have more people that come back from that close brush with death and can share. It's really interesting. So, how does this all impact the spiritual world? And it's really hard to say, but I think we're certainly hearing a lot more near-death experiences than we did 20, 25 years ago when I started this. People are sharing them sooner after they occurred, again, because of their confidence and their understanding. And people are far less skeptical of near-death experiences. People really understand deep down from evidence that near-death experiences are real. It's okay to share your near-death experience. It's okay to listen to other people's near-death experiences. And I think that's really helping people to be more open and positive about sharing them. It's helping other people that hear their near-death experiences to share in those positive life changes as they hear about, with some strong evidence from their friend, family, or loved one about the reality of an afterlife, of God, and how death is not to be feared. And that really sort of sinks in as a powerful spiritual message. I've given some talks to medical groups, and especially in recent years, I am amazed because how positive the response is. They actually, to get continuing medical education credits, they have to do a review of my talk and put it in writing. And the great majority of healthcare professionals, including doctors that are there, are very positive about near-death experiences and fascinated. So I think it's really starting to sink in, and now more, and there's certainly internet shows like you are further helping to validate the reality and the significance and the importance of near-death experience. So it's a whole new different era, unlike 20, 30, certainly 40 years ago.
Some experiencers also talk about downloads or learning special knowledge.
Sure.
You mentioned that in your first book too, and can you expand on that?
That's referred to commonly as universal knowledge. This is, again, sometimes I have to kind of pinch myself and say, wait a minute, they were unconscious or clinically dead as this is happening. And yet here they are in this unearthly realm, cognitively, consciously thinking and processing information light years beyond what they could do on Earth. So the universal knowledge they're aware of is literally a knowledge of everything. It's an awareness. And it kind of almost makes me nuts where they say, wow, the universe is so simple. Math, science, gosh, I didn't know it was so easy. It's like, not to me, it's not easy. But that's a kind of amazing awareness that in the afterlife, there is that knowledge, is that body accumulated collective knowledge, and people seem to have access to there, and can be aware of it in a way that would be far beyond anything we know on Earth. Occasionally, near-death experiencers come back and seem to retain a little bit of that, certainly having an interest in art, an interest in science, an interest in physics or mathematics that they didn't have before. So, it seems to be real, and it's just yet another vivid demonstration that in the afterlife, there's not only going to be that overwhelming compassion, love, connection, but there's also going to be knowledge and understanding far more than we could possibly have in our limited physical brain capacity in our earthly life.
How can people have access to the NDERF files,
Sure.
and how can they contact them?
Great question. I encourage everybody, if you really want to see for yourself, seeing is believing. So saunter on over to our research website, nderf.org. That's for the Near Death Experience Research Foundation. You can find over 5,000 near-death experiences, as well as many other experiences posted. In fact, if you go at the top link under experiences and drop down to exceptional accounts, I'll bet if you just read 10 in a row near-death experiences from what we call our exceptional archives, that could literally change your life. I mean, over and over, you're going to see just exactly what we talked about here today, and a lot more of these overwhelming, deeper consistencies, and you'll find it to be a profound message of hope and inspiration. I'm sure just about anybody. So we don't have anything for sale. We don't solicit donations. We do this as a public service, literally, Jody, my wife, and I, is a labor of love. And it's really been one of the most positive, beautiful things of our life for both me and Jody to share with the world these astonishing accounts.
Well, I congratulate you because you're doing such a good job.
Well,
And
thank you.
what would you tell someone who is afraid of death?
Yeah, it's understandable to be afraid of death. I think that's a natural instinct we have here in our earthly life. But virtually all near-death experiencers don't fear death. So I think the best thing I could say is read a number of near-death experience accounts, or even better, talk to as many people as you can that have had a near-death experience. And I think that will kind of help people to understand that there is an afterlife. There's a wonderful afterlife, and it's for all of us. And that can certainly, I think, for many people, help significantly reduce their fear of death.
Hi, I'm Janet Riley, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And I am thrilled to invite you to join us at our annual conference, August 27th to the 31st in Oak Brook, Illinois, just outside Chicago, where we will celebrate the 50th anniversary of the field of near-death studies. Join us for 4 inspiring days with more than 100 speakers, including the legendary Life After Life author Raymond Moody, University of Virginia Professor Emeritus Dr. Bruce Grayson, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell of the Telepathy Tapes, the psychic lawyer Mark Anthony, and spiritual teacher Carolyn Mace, among others. You'll experience healing workshops, including meditation, Reiki, spiritual counseling, and our beloved bookstore with exclusive book signings, surrounded by others who share your interests and your experiences. Come make friends and become part of a warm, caring community that will beckon you to return. Every year, we welcome nearly 1,000 attendees and serve over 20,000 globally through educational resources and support groups. This warm, deeply connected community celebrates life and the life that follows. For nearly 50 years, IANDS has represented researchers who study near-death experiences and supported those who have had near-death experiences and experienced related phenomena. Our mission is to educate the world. Our hope is that by supporting research and people, and by communicating far and wide to reporters, podcasters, and through our website and social media, we can normalize discussions about death and the afterlife and help answer the very important question: what happens when we die? Our planet faces unprecedented challenges, and our conference offers a place to recharge, to be informed, to be healed and inspired. Register now at IANDS.org, that's IANDS.org, and become part of a gathering that informs, heals, and inspires. We hope to see you there.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.